This desert reminds me of a woman.
Why's that?
It goes on and on and on.
Hey, I'm looking at every single episode of the new Scooby-Doo Movies, my favorite classic Scooby series, and breaking down who these guest stars are and why I love these episodes so much. We've already covered other greats like Batman, the Globetrotters, Cher, and even a ton of other Hanna-Barbera crossovers, but there's still more to go. Our next batch of guest stars just so happen to appear twice each, both in the first season, and they're all comedy legends, so it only makes sense to pair these up for our next analysis. On today's menu, when Scooby-Doo met the legendary Don Knotts, as well as the comedic trio, the Three Stooges. I'm going to get into who these wonderful guests are, and everything that made their appearances so memorable to me personally, so let's waste no time and get into it.
Coyote, but they're not supposed to hurt people.
Then why are you shaking?
Maybe this coyote doesn't know we're people.
We're starting with another one of my personal favorite guest stars. Who is Don Knotts? If you're like me and grew up with television and films of the 50s to 70s especially, that's an easy question to answer. In 2004, TV Guide ranked him number 27 on their 50 greatest TV stars of all time, and that tells you already what an amazing character actor he was. His film credits are expansive, like 1964's live-action and animation hybrid The Incredible Mr. Limpet. Check that one out if you haven't.
Hey, that's Don Knotts, the funny man from TV.
Henry, you really are
A fish? Yes, Bessie, you can say it.
Or 1966's classic horror comedy, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, easily one of my favorites growing up.
Some men are afraid of their shadows. Some shadows are afraid of their men. So what is brave? How should I know? I'm chicken.
1975's The Apple Dumpling Gang was another favorite of mine, and even spawned a sequel, starring alongside Tim Conway, who we'll be talking about as a guest star in another video. While Gus, that same year, is definitely not as much of a must-see. A year later, No Deposit, No Return is another Disney oddity that I grew up really liking. When it comes to Disney, maybe you also know him for voicing the mayor, Turkey Lurkey, in 2005's Chicken Little. His final on-screen appearance in a film, 1998's Pleasantville, is more of almost a cameo for him, but it shows you how long he continued working, and it's easily one of my top 5 favorite films of all time, if not my favorite, which it is most days. And it's such a perfect farewell to him, as the main characters, played by Tobey Maguire and Reese Witherspoon, end up being sent by him into Maguire's favorite 1950s TV show, which changes his world as much as it does theirs. And it's really television like that exactly where Don Knotts came to shine. Rightfully, a lot of people might know him for playing Mr. Furley on Three's Company in the 70s and so many countless shows, but it's the 1960 series The Andy Griffith Show that really made him iconic.
Now, the minute it looks like there's gonna be trouble, we got to nip it! Nip it in the bud! You get that? Let's hear it!
Starring in the show for 8 years and 162 episodes, he played Deputy Barney Fife, probably the most iconic and memorable of all of the great characters in that series, which I grew up watching constantly. This character ultimately would even win him 5 Emmy Awards over the course of the show. As such, his Scooby-Doo appearance made perfect sense to me, as we directly reference his most iconic role pretty heavily in one of these episodes. The second one, The Spooky Fog of Juneberry, 4 years after that show ended, directly parodies the setting of the show, Mayberry, in the title and location, and has Don working as an officer for Sheriff Dandy Griffith. Obviously, that name is a parody of Andy Griffith from the show, though the character actually doesn't look at all like Andy, and the episode takes place in a pretty different location from the show. This wouldn't actually be the last appearance of him in the franchise, though, as 2002 video game Scooby-Doo, Night of 100 Frights, saw him return alongside Tim Conway and also Tim Curry in the voice cast. Sorry to say, I wouldn't expect to see me talk about that game in depth. I didn't grow up with any of the consoles it's on, and I don't really know how to play or enjoy video games, so that's just one part of the franchise that is not my personal forte. And if I were to cover it, I wouldn't force you to have it sandwiched in the middle of this video to find it. Sadly, Don Knotts passed away at the age of 81 in 2006, but all of his characters and appearances will easily stand the test of time. If you haven't seen some of his most iconic films, or any of his television appearances, absolutely go find some of them wherever you can. These episodes were such a treat growing up, especially because I loved everything that he did. As for Scooby-Doo, let's dive into his first appearance on the show.
Calm! Calm! Do murder and calm go together? Calm and murder?
The New Scooby-Doo Movies, Season 1, Episode 5, Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner, originally aired October 7th, 1972. The title is a reference to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a very important 1967 film that touched on interracial marriage positively in a time when films were not so likely to do that, as it had been still illegal in 17 states up until 6 months before the film was released. How is the story of that film relevant to this episode? It's not. It was just a pun.
Today, Scooby-Doo meets Don Knotts.
It's a dark and stormy night, because of course it is. And so much is already happening, like Velma's voice coming out of Daphne right before Daphne speaks as if it's all her talking.
It's going to be dark pretty soon. We should have come to Pinecrest Mountain Lodge hours ago.
Not to mention weird long-neck Fred over here. As none of them can agree on which direction they're headed, they realize they are lost on the way to their lodge.
And any minute we're going to get caught in a typhoon.
A typhoon only happens on the ocean, silly. We'll probably get caught in a flash flood.
Thanks a lot.
Fred decides they will just stop and ask for directions, stopping at Moody Manor, and this is how I feel about that as well. Amongst the infighting, Velma volunteers to open the gates, so they drive on through and
We'll have to walk the rest of the way.
now all on foot, Scooby gets spooked by a tree that gets back up on its own, which the others all write off. Behind the tree, however, is a mysterious, creeping man, at least until he sneezes off his makeup to reveal to us that he's Don Knotts. Another sneeze catches Scoob's attention, recognizing the star instantly. Best he tries to convince the others, however, they don't believe him. They finally come upon Moody Manor itself, looking rather moody themselves, might I add, and knocking on the door. Don Knotts runs in, the door opening by itself. Also closing by itself, they go further in, while Dawn starts donning some new makeup and costuming. The gang find a picture of a creepy-looking old man, presuming him to be the owner, when the butler comes out saying that he's been expecting them. Seeming to presume they are someone else come to see Captain Moody, he goes off to fetch someone for them. In this shot, you can actually see the animation cell sliding with the characters. They find the door to now be locked, along with every other door that they try in the house, and even bars on the windows they don't seem to remember, running up the stairs just for them to drop and slide everyone back down. Even the phone is dead when they try that. The ominous portrait of Captain Moody moving its eyes to get a better look at them. Don Knotts, meanwhile, is switching characters again to Captain Moody's friend, while the gang hope for a way out. Scoob finds the chimney, which unfortunately volunteers him to crawl up himself, interrupting a vulture's nest, but at least opening the secret passage. Inside that creepy place, a trapdoor sends them sliding down and right back out to where they started. Don Knotts then comes back out in his new attire, naming off each member of the gang as one of Captain Moody's nieces and nephews.
And you're Ronald. Big as a whale, but I'd know you even in a squall.
Even with Scooby not being a dachshund, he doesn't get the hint, and they do agree with him that the storm is too bad to leave in. When most of them don't want to risk poisoned food, the friend calls for the maid and goes to fetch her. And obviously it's Don Knotts in a wig that pops back out.
Oh, yeah, you betcha. Bye, Yump and Yiminy.
With that, the gang finally all start to realize all of these people seem to look pretty similar, being shown to their rooms by whoever this one is. Daphne finds bars on the windows upstairs as well when the lights cut out, spooking everyone. The boys of course can't resist food, just like the girls can't resist sleeping in the same bed, but their stomachs convince them to get up too.
And would you bring me back a double-decker, Swiss cheese, a ham on rye, a tall glass of cold milk, and a big hot fudge sundae?
Sure. If you're still here when I get back.
Huh? Wait for me!
Velma accidentally spooks everyone, and we randomly have Velma's voice actress saying Daphne's line. And it's definitely supposed to be Daphne's line, it's even still her lips that move, but that's very much Velma's voice.
Oh, it's nothing but a loose board. Come on, and watch where you're walking.
Love the on-model animation here when they get spooked again. The girls run into the boys, scare themselves back to their room, and the boys carry on, unaware of the ghost floating behind them. They try eating their giant meal, meat, sauce included, but the ghost finally gets the better of them, Scooby even momentarily locking Shaggy out of the room. Fred, of course, doesn't believe them until it pops out of the wall.
Don't run. Stand up to it.
Take bravado, of course, running to the girls for help, and wouldn't you know, Daphne running into the closet. A likely thing for her to do. Notice she doesn't run back out, she just teleports. Interesting. The ghost starts flickering, somehow, between being itself and Don Knotts as it warns that the guilty one must die. That's kinda harsh. Chasing them all throughout the hallway. Barricading up the doors, Thelma notes that the ghost of Captain Moody seems pretty solid as Fred finds a book on ghosts. The wall flips Fred, ghostly Knotts trying to scare them further, until Fred flips out again and knocks off the hat and wig. Looking at it closer, not only would a ghost obviously not wear a wig, he looked a lot like the other people they saw tonight. Fred rings for the maid, Don manifesting as the butler. They correct him, and he runs back out in a wig. And that's that.
All right, the little game is over.
The Knots! Everybody back, freeze!
Here's the interesting thing for this episode. He only refers to himself as Homer Pipsqueak, world-famous Private Eye, despite being introduced as and clearly being identified by Scooby as Don Knotts. People typically say that means this clearly is not him and is in fact Homer, a different person. However, I choose to believe that it is him and he's just on a weird little side quest, so we will still treat it as such. He switches to his Private Eye outfit, and Velma once again confesses that they are not Captain Moody's nieces and nephews, bursting his bubble. Of course, he still doesn't believe them, expecting someone to confess, so Velma asks him to simply bring out Captain Moody, but it turns out that's the problem. He's gone missing. Captain Moody contacted him earlier in the day, suspecting something was afoot and that his two nieces and nephews were on the way before the connection ended, so Don Knotts personally came out here to investigate. As they walk around with him to look it over, it's clear someone is in this suit of armor listening as he believes that one of the nieces or nephews showed up early tonight. The suit sends them crashing through the floor into a secret tunnel, where he further explains that each of the nieces and nephews inherit a fourth of the captain's giant fortune, and he so far can't find any trace of the captain being taken off the premises. Scooby tries sniffing Captain Moody's socks he was wearing the day before to track him, but the smell is a little too strong it seems, until he gets a whiff and tracks the rest of the socks. The girls search around the graveyard outside, hearing some sounds they do not want to hear, while Shaggy and Fred split up. Shaggy is not too afraid of the ghost since he believes it's just Dawn again, having him tag along as he runs into Dawn and Scooby again, realizing what that means. They run into Fred, who also has a ghost, so now two identical ghosts chase them as they run past the girls. Dawn hides in the suit and uses it to open the trap door again, dropping the ghosts, and they realize that the ghosts were clearly trying to keep them away from that mine area, and that Scooby had been following the captain's trail to there. Checking out the mine, Daphne gets a fright from another ghost, when they realize it's the real Captain Moody, and the stakes are high with the two ghosts coming quick. The boys get their attention in a minecart, pushing them once the ghosts jump in, and falling right into the trap, caught by the others. As Dawn suspected, the nephews showed up early to do harm to their uncle, while it seems the nieces just stayed home. I suppose they don't have it out for their uncle the same way. Good for them. Taking a hint from Scooby, Dawn suggests the gang get the meal that was meant for the nieces and nephews instead, so everyone enjoys a hearty banquet together in celebration. When the captain and Dawn can't help with directions to the actual lodge the gang was meant to go to, Dawn suggests they'll never be lost with a tracker like Scooby.
Good work, old Scooby Sniffer. Old Scooby Sleuth.
And that's Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner. I wouldn't say this episode necessarily stands out as significant or one of the best, but it's definitely not a bad episode, and is very much elevated if you are going in as a fan of our guest star. It's an interesting case where he's technically sort of not playing himself, even though he's introduced and recognized as himself in the very episode, so there's no doubt that he is our guest star. It's just a little dubious as to whether or not that's true in the universe of the show. But it really doesn't matter, and he still gets plenty of time to show off his comedic abilities. The only downside is I really think his facial acting and physical comedy were his strong suits, something Mr. Limpet is still able to capture even in animation just because of the high production value. But between the character being more low energy combined with the production value of a Scooby episode in contrast, I think a lot of his inherent comedic potential is lost on this particular episode. You don't get to have him doing any over-the-top faces and reactions. You don't really get to see him sort of freak out, so you don't really get exactly what you would expect or be looking for from a guest appearance from him. That's not to say that he isn't funny or enjoyable in the episode though. They still give him a good amount to play with by having him in the different disguises, allowing him still a decent amount of fun when it comes to his face, accents, and types of characters that you actually might not necessarily see him do as often in other things. And maybe sometimes it can be good to see something that you don't expect as much from such specific actors that get hold into certain expectations. And of course, the next episode we're getting into does better fill out some of those expectations anyway, so it's probably better that this one doesn't necessarily fall into that. The mystery itself is pretty good when it comes to Scooby Fair, an uncle missing and his nieces and nephews potentially being responsible for his disappearance, and the gang being mistaken for them. The ghost of Captain Moody as a design, regardless of who is pretending to be him, is really kind of generic, but there is something about his face that's a little unsettling honestly. By no means a memorable spook or villain, but in such a busy episode it does get the job done. There's not much mystery to who is behind the ghost. We know it's the nieces or nephews, but that's not too far off from a classic whodunit. There's a lot of rough and off-model animation per usual with the show, coming from the longer runtime on a typical production schedule, and I love that. It always makes for a lot more entertainment for me and adds to the charm. You even get the added bonus of the voice mishap that we've seen on occasion. So overall, not one of the top tier episodes, but definitely one I will never skip, especially with the affection that I've had for our guest star since I was very young. It's fun, there's a lot happening, definitely not boring or uninteresting. Now, for something a little more typical of our guest star, let's take a look at his other appearance and see if they can really utilize him to his best potential this time. The new Scooby-Doo Movies Season 1, Episode 9, The Spooky Fog of Juneberry, originally aired November 4th, 1972. As established earlier, Juneberry is a reference to Mayberry from The Andy Griffith Show. The gang are driving through this western-looking area, everyone starving except for the boys who finished off the watermelon. I think Scooby tried to finish off Shaggy as well. They find the population sign for Juneberry, which seems to be dwindling, as a storm seems to occur. Not being able to see anything gets worse as they start hearing all kinds of eerie noises, but as they pass through the town, the fog and the sounds all seem to go away. They do, however, hear the sound of a cop with the siren blasting, the officer pulling up to the van and revealing himself to be none other than, of course, Don Knotts. The boys catch on and point this out to the others, and they all feed his ego a bit with how much they love his work, because this time he's actually himself for sure. He insists Fred was speeding, and the more Fred looks over, he realizes the speedometer is actually the RPM gauge.
Darn it. Happened again. Someone switched my gauges when I was looking.
How often does that happen? And why is a famous actor even working as the deputy of this middle-of-nowhere town? Questions we will wonder about for eternity. The gang still needing a place to eat and sleep, he recommends Juneberry, which they are not thrilled about, Shaggy being so unhappy that he seems to have forgotten to fully color in his shirt here. Don plays dumb about the spooky fog they witnessed and assures them they are safe with him around, then proceeds to fall off his bike. The gang proceed to accept his police escort back to Juneberry though, just in time for another family to be leaving.
Sore heads!
We next meet Sheriff Dandy Griffith, who again does not at all resemble Andy Griffith. More trouble happens as Gene Haltree shows up to complain about the cattle rustling happening to the sheriff. His name, of course, is a reference to famous cowboy actor Gene Autry, but like Sheriff Dandy, that's basically as far as the resemblance goes. Really just here to reinforce that this is the Wild West, which Mayberry wasn't in the Andy Griffith Show, so who knows why they decided that was the vibe. The gang inquire about some food, so Don first shows them their accommodations, which turns out to be the beds in the jail cells. The promised food turns out to be some bananas and custard he traded with a citizen that couldn't pay a fine with money. This, of course, receives mixed reception. They try to get some sleep that night, Don poorly keeping watch until a shadow looms over and frightens him. Scooby gets the same fright, and the others wake up to a startling laugh and something being thrown into the jail. Looking closer, they find a horseshoe with a note warning them to get out of town before it's too late, the creepy laugh cackling in the distance again. Don seems to be in shock, so Shaggy tosses some water on him and he goes over to try and do his job.
Better not fool around with the law out there.
Again, it's so interesting that he's literally famous actor Don Knotts, who they recognize, and yet he's also the deputy of Juneberry, as if he's also simultaneously his Andy Griffith character. I feel like this has to be because that's maybe how kids would best recognize him, unable to easily differentiate the actor from the character. That's just me trying to understand though. He dismisses it as routine and goes back to sleep, getting in a good few kisses from Scooby here, which eventually wakes him up enough for everyone to ask him who tried to scare them, Velma wondering if it was even Sheriff Dandy perhaps. With the laugh of whoever the culprit is standing out so much, they decide to test Sheriff Dandy's laugh, though Don notes that he doesn't laugh too often. Thus, he and the others try telling some jokes, Fred and Velma even doing some Laurel and Hardy impressions, which is interesting because they would be the guest stars in the very next episode, which we will eventually be getting to.
Well, Stanley, this is another fine mess you've gotten us into.
But Ollie, I was only trying to help.
Scooby tries doing a dance, but a banana peel from Shaggy sends him flying, and finally...
No wonder he never laughed.
Suddenly, everything gets dark in the middle of the day, Don realizing it's the return of the spooky fog, and the sheriff doesn't see much point in going out if you can't even see anything, so Fred and Velma decide to go. They don't find much except for a lasso almost getting them though, and a vulture flies in to attack the others in the jail. The three chickens running out where Velma tells them all she found a clue, some mysterious tire tracks. They follow them all the way up to the end, said end being a bunch of crushed rocks that can't be driven over. Turns out this leads to Boot Hill, the cemetery, and Shaggy is not happy to hear Fred wants him to investigate that tonight. Immediately there are all kinds of frights for the chickens, and also some great atmosphere, like the nooses in the tree. Fred has them split up, saying to whistle if they find anything, and interestingly, they split up Scooby and Daphne for once. It's kind of nice to see the two of them have some solo interaction here. Shaggy meanwhile ends up with Don fittingly, Don jumping into Shaggy's arms this time.
I can't move! There's something on my foot!
What is it?
I don't know! It's heavy!
Wait, I see what's on your foot. What? My foot.
They both end up in a hole in the ground, while Scooby becomes protective over Daphne, the two becoming more frightened as they see a shadow, which thankfully turns out to be harmless. The chickens, meanwhile, see something pretty frightening to them as soon as they get out of the hole, and neither of them can seem to get a proper whistle out to contact the others, but thankfully Fred and Velma find them, also reuniting with Scoob and Daphne. Scooby then ends up pulling a spring out of the ground, only for everyone to get a fright from the skeleton that's obviously somebody in a costume walking around. Scooby hugs on a tombstone that ends up being a controller for a secret passage, the skeleton dashing off and Fred just missing it. The chickens take this chance to escape, only to run into some really frightening ghosts. But who knows what this thing is, or this lady ghost, or this big guy? You start to get the feeling that none of these are really all that cohesive with the episode. Alex Toth did some guest designing on this episode, including all of these ghosts and more, and you have to kind of wonder if everybody was on the same page. While the other three end up at a dead end with some tunnels, the others catch up in their fear, and the drawbridge starts going up, ensuring they are stuck there. As they start heading through the tunnel though, one of those weird ghost designs starts following them again, splitting them all up, Fred and the girl seeing these teeth-like things.
What is it?
They look like icicles.
Exactly. A common cave formation. The top icicles are called stalactites. The bottom ones are called stalagmites.
It gets crazier when they seem to find a giant brontosaurus.
It can't be. The brontosaurus died out over 1 million years ago.
Tell that to him.
And just like that, it's gone, and they realize it's just a projector and sound effects trying to scare them. Meanwhile, the chickens run into even more of these ghost designs that just don't make sense at all. Like, whoever is trying to scare them seems very confused or just using anything they can get their hands on at this point, much as I love a good headless horseman. We don't even have time to breathe though, because what the hell is this thing? Yet another random ghost just running through the tunnels.
Stop! In the name of the law! I don't think he hurt you.
As these ghosts also just vanish, they don't have time to think as a giant rock comes rumbling through, breaking a hole in the ground, which Shaggy and Scooby manage to fall through. Down there they come upon some carts, and take a wild ride through the tunnels, landing right back where they started, but with a chain at least. They use it to swing up somewhere, able to see Dawn finally, when something seems to be tunneling out under Scooby. Thankfully, it's Fred and the girls and not a monster though. They find a door that says Dead Man's Cave, and start to push it open, and following that tunnel they find a skeleton at work, or in this case, clearly a bad guy in the costume as we saw who's probably the mastermind. They even see him turning on the sound effects right before them. Dawn's sneeze blows their cover, and the skeleton gets away in some smoke, an earthquake seeming to happen as the gang try to escape. The skeleton starts to flood the place, so everybody has to try and swim, Scooby saving Dawn, and then the skeleton is suddenly climbing up a rope and cuts it so they can't follow. He is busy apparently. Everyone begs and convinces Scooby to climb up with the rope to rescue everyone else, successfully making it and helping Fred. They get everyone up one by one, and through the fog, they see the cattle rustlers we heard about earlier, 3 skeleton men being the rustlers in particular, so the spooky fog has been to cover their activity the whole time. Shocker. Everyone else starts making noises to stir up the cattle, starting a stampede which forces the skeleton men to surrender. Unmasked, the lead skeleton is none other than Gene Haltree, which I'm sure is another massive shocker, even as the one complaining about this exactly. I guess his game was to be less suspicious, because who's going to suspect the guy complaining about it?
You're coming with me, Haltree. Watch it, kid. This is police business.
The sheriff and Dawn wave the gang off after thanking them, and they think they are finally free of this adventure until they hear a siren again. Out walks Dawn, because it turns out they forgot something. Scooby. He gives Dawn one last kiss, and they all part ways for good. And that's the Spooky Fog of Juneberry, or just the Spooky Fog as things like the home video releases call it more simply. In contrast to how the previous episode felt like it wasn't able to fully utilize our guest star's full potential, Don Knotts feels much more like he's really himself here, or at least is more like what we expect of him from his typical characters. And that makes sense despite being a deputy and not an actor. He's really basically Barney Fife from The Andy Griffith Show, not Don Knotts. He's absolutely tuned into that character here, stepping back into those shoes through animation, fully by design of the episode, and it works because that's really how kids would most likely recognize him. His vocal performance alone really stands out as obviously being him, in contrast to playing overly serious or different characters with accents like in the previous episode. And notably, with so much more focus on sort of being himself this time, the animation of Scooby is really able to capture his facial expressions so much more. There's so many moments throughout the episode where you really feel like you're getting the kind of over-the-top facial reaction that you've gotten from him when he was standing there on camera in an Andy Griffith episode. As such, I think both episodes are interesting uses of him, but as far as recognizability, maybe maybe even memorability, the Spooky Fog might be the stronger episode. I think it's one that I enjoy more as well. It's not necessarily quite as obvious who the villain is going to turn out to be as it was in the prior episode, and you have more interesting locations between the jail, exploring the rest of the town, the spooky cemetery, and the tunnels, so it just feels like more is going on here. Danny Griffith is even a decent red herring. I remember suspecting him as a child. If you like Barney as a character, or Don Knotts as an actor, this episode should definitely deliver on both fronts when it comes to a decent 43-minute watch. The only strange thing about the episode really is the disconnect between the ghost designs and the setting. You could argue one or two of these fit the Western aesthetic maybe, but most of these Alex Toth designs seem completely divorced from the episode, and they honestly seem kind of out of place for Scooby even. None of them really feel like they come naturally from the style established by the series at this point. I like them. They are really actually pretty scary looking, but that's kind of what makes them so out of place as well. You do have to wonder if they just asked Toth to design some monsters and ghosts and that's all they really told him, and he did his big thing and they just ran with it. It does make the episode more memorable though, so props to that. Anyway, both of these episodes were definitely some of the most enjoyable to watch growing up, because I actually knew who this guest star was and loved him so much. So they were able to do exactly what they were supposed to do, which is to feel like a celebrity I recognize is crossing over with Scooby. If you like Scooby and only know Don Knotts from these episodes though, or even just these and Andy Griffith, definitely check out some of his films. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken was more universally panned, but absolutely was a favorite of mine growing up. And if you like these episodes and Scooby, I think there's a good chance you'll like that one as well as a starting point. Pleasantville is definitely a must-watch if you haven't seen that as well, but again, it's more comparatively a cameo in parts of the film rather than a leading role. Don Knotts was one of my favorite stars of this era growing up, and I still remember the day he passed away and how sad I was. But I will always have these Scooby episodes to remember him fondly with, and everything else in his filmography. With all that being said, we still have another guest star, or in this case, 3 of them, that we need to talk about.
Got the collar? Got the collar!
So, the Three Stooges. Who are they and how did they end up meeting Scooby-Doo? Last time we mentioned them, former Stooge Joe Besser guest starred in the series finale of the show as his character Babu in the Genie crossover. He was the only actual Stooge to ever be in Scooby, and he's not involved with these episodes ironically. Today instead we're sticking directly to the original 3-ish relevant, under their stage names: Mo Howard, his real-life brother Curly Howard, and Larry Fine. I won't bother going into a whole documentary on them and other various members. You could find plenty of that in good quality on here, but they were basically a comedy team from the vaudeville era, and they make a perfect cartoon crossover because their cartoonish violence toward each other and slapstick is basically right out of the world of animation, and what made them so famous. The trio solidified in the 1930s, with their legendary run of short films for Columbia Pictures well into the 1940s, quickly becoming a household name. Curly, stout and ironically bald, Mo, gruff and boss-like, and Larry being kooky right in the middle. Their content never deviated much from their formula of Mo yelling, Curly yelping around, and Larry getting the brunt of it, but that's what made them so unique, consistent, and memorable.
Whoa! A squizzle!
Their 15 to 20 minute shorts, originally shown in theaters before films, became a late-night television staple in the 1950s and 60s, introducing them further to continuing generations. This opened the door to 1965's The New Three Stooges, their major jump into animation. The Three Stooges voiced themselves for animated portions, while also appearing in new live-action segments for the show as well. Sadly though, the original Curly had passed away in 1952, so Curly Joe DeRita took on the part instead. Over about a year, the show ran for 156 different animated short segments, and definitely kept the characters on the minds of Scooby's target demographic. As alluded to earlier, none of the Stooges would eventually return for these 2 Scooby episodes, however. Mo and Larry would pass away only 3 years after the Scooby episodes, and that particular iteration of the trio from the New Three Stooges had really stopped appearing already 2 years prior in 1970, having retired. Instead, we have voice actors impersonating them. Pat Harrington Jr. is definitively credited as Mo, but Larry and Curly are credited more confusingly in various places. Doss Butler is credited as both Larry and Curly, but across some places, Frank Welker, Fred's voice actor, and Joe Baker are instead listed as their voice actors. I'm famously pretty spot on when being able to pick apart and recognize voices typically, and my money personally is on Doss Butler. That is very definitively his voice, very distinct in how it sounds to my ears, and the 2 of them even sound like each other.
Size of stage, screen, television, and comic books. This mine Dusty sure funny. It glows in the dark.
Either way, Curly retains the nyuk 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 laugh of the original Curly and seems to be more based on him rather than Joe DeRita, but they still refer to him as Curly Joe here, so he's kind of both weirdly. And if that laugh seems familiar based on just Hanna-Barbera, Frank Welker basically impersonated Curly down to the laugh when voicing the titular character Jabberjaw in the 1976 Hanna-Barbera series. And if not from that, maybe Scooby-Doo meets the Boo Brothers makes it familiar, as the three ghosts in that film are also based on the Three Stooges, down to that laugh. And given how cartoonish the trio are, so much that animation has been pulling from them ever since, it only makes sense that they would be the starter guests in the first ever series premiere episode of the show. Let's get into it. The new Scooby-Doo Movies Season 1, Episode 1, Ghastly Ghost Town. The series premiere episode originally aired September 9th, 1972.
Today, Scooby-Doo meets the Three Stooges.
After randomly going west in the last episode, we are really committing to that this time as we start off in a ghost town, the gang getting lost and seeing a bunch of random creatures before a sign that warns of a monster ahead. And it seems kind of accurate. This giant bat racing toward them. And ooh, Fred and Daphne are not looking good. No wonder they crashed into a sand dune. They have to head out on foot, past the warning sign again, and do in fact see yet another monster. And then all of the other creatures they saw before. Some scary silhouettes come to view, chasing after them all, but of course it turns out to be the Three Stooges themselves. The orangutan that they wrestle is named Ngagi, which is interestingly a reference to Ngagi, a joke toward the 1930 exploitation film about a tribe of gorilla-worshipping women encountered by the explorer in the film. Despite the film claiming to show a ritual in which African women are given over to gorillas as something I can't say on YouTube, the film was actually filmed in Los Angeles with American actresses. Some of them are indeed white women in black makeup doing you-know-what. You can get the film on Blu-ray if you want with a pristine 4K restoration, it turns out. Definitely a weird and interesting thing for Scooby to reference, and something kids would not get. The Stooges claim Ngagi to also be a star like themselves, and offer the gang to come with them while they see to the van getting fixed. Turns out the ghost town is literally themed around the Three Stooges, and it's an amusement park that they've apparently decided to open up for some reason. They bought the place 2 months ago, but things like the giant bat and animals getting loose started to happen. The dinosaur, Tyrone, was actually part of the amusement and playground until this started happening. As someone is outside listening, right on cue, Tyrone starts wreaking havoc, and the sheriff apparently told them they have to shut the place down out of safety concerns. We find out the guy who is lurking outside is Rhino, their caretaker who has been acting suspicious lately. They're just too scared to fire him. The Stooges show them Tyrone up close, definitely hollow, not even a single seam for somebody to get inside. Tyrone suddenly starts screaming again, and a light shines on them, a man accusing them of trespassing on his property. An opening suddenly appears on Tyrone, which Scooby enters as it closes, now trapped in the mouth. Fred discovers how to trigger the opening, and they explore everything inside, the roar being a tape recorder. This man turns out to be Amos Crunch, manager of the Three Stooges, and they explain all of this to them, including that Crunch destroyed the tape so that it won't disturb anyone again. Curly Joe's little bat also strangely starts freaking out around Crunch, and Fred still wonders about that giant bat they saw earlier. And worse, Velma disappears, except she's also literally right with them as Fred says this.
Come on, spread out. Let's find her.
Like, guys, don't worry, I found her. She's right there with you. Where she's actually supposed to be, Mr. Crunch pulls a lever and sends her through a trap door. So I guess he is the bad guy. They all decide to split up, the boys ending up in a saloon, while the Stooges search a cowboy museum.
Hey, Kimosabi! Did you happen to see a girl about 2 inches high with glasses?
Nope. Oops.
The other dummies seem fine, but the gunslinger starts moving unfortunately, so they get out while it laughs. Fred and Daphne meanwhile have it back and forth, not understanding how the canteen runs out of water while this cactus is actually behind it. Scooby sneezes his way into a secret shaft, which Shaggy joins because of this creepy hand.
Hey, Scoob, it's only me. What's the matter? Haven't you ever seen a flower child before?
As soon as they try going up a staircase, a hairy arm pulls a lever, which starts moving the stairs, sending the boys sliding into a gigantic jack-in-the-box, finding themselves in the funhouse. They have fun with the mirrors until Scooby realizes the orangutan is a little real, the hairy arm from before belonging to Ngagi.
This desert reminds me of a woman.
Why's that?
It goes on and on and on.
Man.
Come on, Daph. Where's your sense of humor?
Hello? Fred is cancelled. Career over. The cactus makes sure to cover up all of their footprints so that they can't follow them back to town, and then Fred ends up falling for a mirage of a pool. As the vulture washes over, they head to the cactus for some shade from the heat. But also, isn't it nighttime? How much shade are you gonna get? And it proceeds to mess with them until they realize someone is inside the cactus. It deflates itself, and all they find is the suit left. Velma realizes she's fallen into the old mine meanwhile, and this happens, so—
Quick!
Come on, right.
The Stooges get out of there. The rest of the gang reunite, realizing it seems Crunch and Rhino are playing cards instead of helping. And speaking of needing help, the extremely iconic gunslinger from the opening credits appears just as Daffy and Fred fall into the trap door. The gunslinger warns them to get out of town or else, so Scooby does his iconic move toward it. Fred and Daphne then realize they landed on poor Velma, and the gunslinger pulls his gun on Scooby, ready to attack. Scooby crashes into him with a barrel, which is enough to short-circuit him, falling apart all over. It's very Westworld, but that film wouldn't come out for another year. Down in the mines, the Stooges speed all across the track and crash, realizing all of them are now trapped here. Curly Joe notes that the mine dust seems to be unusually making him glow, but his bat flying around causes so much dust in the air that Velma sneezes loud enough to end in destruction. The Stooges decide to dig their way out though.
I didn't know anybody could be so daffy.
Then you don't know the Three Stooges.
Velma spots an air vent that they might be able to yell through and get some help if someone can hear, which thankfully the boys catch wind of and make contact. They run off to Crunch and Rhino for help, only to realize that both people in the window have been dummies the whole time. There's this whole bit of Shaggy trying to give Scooby some time and quiet to think of a plan, and he just won't shut up and realize he's the problem, which is actually really funny, and I do love this part, even though it's mostly just wasting time for filler. Scooby even ends up falling asleep with the giant hat on, and then suddenly they teleport outside. Not sure how they did that. Scooby finally considers using Tyrone, driving him over and using him to dig through and rescue everyone. These two are upset about the gang ruining things, and first, I'm not sure if this guy's bottom area is supposed to be cut off or not. I don't really think so. Second, the gunslinger was clearly a robot malfunctioning and now he's a guy in a costume, so I'm not sure what's up with that. The gunslinger we first saw was definitely a guy in a costume, but he doesn't look anything like the later ones here that attacked Scooby. As the others are grateful, the giant bat from earlier speeds out, which the boys try to stop with Tyrone, but end up knocking the Stooges into a mess. They find a projector though, revealing the spooky visuals from earlier to be just from that. No sound or shaking ground. Tyrone drops a bunch of rocks on the giant bat just in time, bringing the two men over to the others, and dropping them in jail, obviously being Crunch and Rhino. Crunch discovered uranium in the mine under the ghost town, and it's illegal to sell uranium to anyone but the government, so he had to scare everyone off to get away with it. The bat car was the transportation, and all the noises were to cover up the sound of the dynamite being used to get the uranium. Curly Joe's little bat is so calm now because it was being affected by all the uranium dust, like when around Crunch. The amusement park opens as intended, and seems to be going pretty solid now, approved by the sheriff. He even let Shaggy take home a little bit of uranium, handing it to Curly Joe for a minute. This unfortunately sets off the little bat, knocking the sandwich in the air, but the good news is that it all lands safely and they get their snack after all. And that's Ghastly Ghost Town. Not terrible for a debut episode of the show. It doesn't feel like it's unnecessarily long or dragged out in ways that make it boring, even if it does feel like it has noticeable filler at times. The Stooges make for some decent guest stars. They clearly have been toned down when it comes to their slapstick, not constantly abusing each other or even having Mo be so verbally abusive, but you can get the gist of who they are and what their dynamic is. It's interesting that they all are in these weird matching yellow jumpsuits, because they've never worn anything like that before, and they didn't really wear matching outfits in particular, so this is just a weird design quirk they came up with for the show. Again, I'm very certain that's just simply Dawes Butler as Curly Joe and Larry. I say the mystery is solved, but he and most voice actor get the job done. I wouldn't say the Stooges have the hardest personalities to replicate, which is why they last. In my mind, they are kind of the most forgettable guest stars on the show though. They don't stand out ever in my memory as the ones I really think of when I consider the great guest stars of the series. That doesn't reflect on the episode itself, however. The gunslinger alone is very iconic imagery to me for the series, from the prominent placement in the opening theme song. And I do love a weird Western amusement park. Even Tyrone is an interesting touch. This is an interesting one where the villains are kind of obvious. They tip us off when Velma gets dumped into the mine, so there isn't really quite as much mystery around who is doing this. And how many times have we seen a costume that's just an indigenous person? Like, that's just a drinking game at this point. There are a lot of fun and enjoyable moments. The joke Fred makes is absolutely diabolical, and even if the Stooges don't really stand out to me among the other guests, I do enjoy watching them just do their thing here. I kind of really don't have much to say about this one overall though, which I expected, so I suppose we should go ahead and look at the final episode of the day, once again with the Stooges. The new Scooby-Doo Movies, Season 1, Episode 11, The Ghost of the Red Baron, originally aired November 18th, 1972. Opening on a for sale sign, the gang are driving through a shortcut, and I think somebody forgot to communicate something because the animation is not being cut off and is exposing that these cells are not fully painted down here on Shaggy. The way he remembered this area, it was full of green and healthy vegetables. Now it's all in ruin, except for this random section of good-looking corn. Speaking of, a plane crop dusts the corn in a drive-by, when suddenly a second red plane appears, and as we get a closer look at the pilot, Fred believes it to be the same kind of plane used by Baron von Richthofen, aka the Red Baron.
I thought the Red Baron was a beagle.
That's Snoopy, dummy.
If you didn't know Snoopy's antagonist was real, he was a German fighter pilot in World War I, having 80 credited aerial victories before being shot down in 1918, dying at the age of 25. Had he lived, he would have been 80 by the time this episode aired. Anyway, as the first plane struggles, the Red Baron tries to force it to land, then starts heading straight for the Mystery Machine, which has to drive through the corn. They crash right into the other plane, getting a flat tire in the process. The farmer is already upset some of his corn got destroyed by the van, but then the pilot for the plane meant to crop dust quits after this, the 5th one to quit this month so far. Mr. Sawyer, who owns the airport, says nobody is stupid enough to do this anymore because they've heard the stories. Well, there actually might be 3 people stupid enough driving up now. Captain Curly first presents a certificate from the Acme Flying School, then a bunch of flying comics, so I'm sure he's very good at the job. And who knows why they are in those ugly yellow jumpsuits yet again. Curly hops into the corn-covered plane, which ends up attracting Scooby, who accidentally turns on the ignition and starts the plane flying into the air. They do a lot of crazy tricks thanks to Scooby mostly, but enough to convince Mr. Sawyer. They land somewhat safely, but unfortunately through the corn again, which Mr. Sawyer thinks was on purpose. But they are getting paid double now, so whatever. We see a truck outside, a man dropping off some fertilizer that we zoom in on, so something tells me this is important. What about you? Meanwhile, this truck is towing the plane, which is towing the van. Work smarter, not harder. As Fred changes the tire, he worries about leaving the Three Stooges here alone, as if that's their business. If you worry about them being in danger, that's a full-time job. The mechanic then shows up, very creepy looking.
Mr. Siegfried ordered me to repair the wheels. He manages the airport for Mr. Sawyer.
He warns them to get out, and they definitely get an answer as to why it's so scary. He warns that the bats are the only thing the Red Baron will allow to fly, and that they will meet him if they stay. Velma is confident their new pilot will survive though, and hearing that there's a new pilot seems to upset him. Just as Velma says there's nothing to worry about, the Red Baron turns on the ignition for a plane, chasing right after them to prove this statement not to be factual. It runs right into that fertilizer, which explodes and seems to kill plant life nearby. Mr. Siegfried appears, also recommending that they leave before he goes. The Stooges get their beauty sleep. Interesting how they have different colored jumpsuits instead of the yellow ones thrown about. This, however, is ruined as a plane zooms around and sends them racing outside to look, the Red Baron dropping down a note with yet another warning. He definitely seems to vanish into thin air like a ghost. And also, why are the Three Stooges so ridiculously short? They barely stand taller than Scooby. Velma talks up Curly Joe, putting all her faith into his ability to defeat the ghost, and they all head back to sleep as a group with padlocks on the door for safety. For a ghost, however, this is nothing, the padlock being cut as the laugh warns them to get out. A miniature plane sent zooming around. Love Scooby jumping on it and just riding around until he runs into the wall. The Red Baron himself, meanwhile, seems to be flying through the air toward them, chasing the boys and laughing, then hopping away like a rabbit. With all that, the Stooges decide to quit unanimously. As they pack out, Velma notices this drooping plant despite all the fertilizer they have around. Mr. Sawyer even says that he puts it on it every day with no improvement. Velma gets an idea and leaves Fred to take care of the Stooges, while the Red Baron appears again, and as Velma tries to check the fertilizer, he goes after her, hopping and flying around, then turning on the ignition for a plane she hid in. He then climbs up this tower, operating the miniature plane once again, and it turns out this is how crop circles happen. The Stooges hop in a plane to help, while Velma starts getting hold of the plane somewhat, even making contact with the others. The boys crawl up the tower, the Red Baron crawls down and destroys the ladder, which leaves the boys trapped up high, while Fred tries to direct Curly on how to fly using the comics. Shaggy starts operating the mini plane likewise, and I love how Velma just makes this face and freezes up. This is also me when I'm very overstimulated. The mini plane lands, Velma starts making contact again, and the Stooges get into various hijinks in the air, trying to follow the instructions. They do manage to land for what it's worth, even if it's not without some damage. As Velma spins around the tower, the windmill catches Shaggy and knocks Scooby off, landing in the plane with Velma. Holding on for dear life, they crash through some trees and finally land, while Shaggy is able to grab a pole and slide down to safety as well. As Velma walks through a patch of tall weeds, she finds it odd, while the others catch up.
How did you manage to get that crate down?
It was easy. We crashed.
Velma looks down and finds Weed Killer, considering how that plant inside is wilting, while these weeds are thriving, putting together that they must have dumped the real fertilizer on these weeds and put the Weed Killer in the fertilizer bags. Shaggy notices a barn down the way is being used as a garage, a pair of wheel tracks and a skid track leading in, which sounds like a plane. Velma suspecting the one that belongs to the Red Baron specifically. There is even an ultrasonic lock to keep people out. Very suspicious. There's definitely some filler here of the boys eating apples. Not really any point at all to this. The Stooges finally get out of the plane after all this time, where they spot the Red Baron messing with the fertilizer bags again. Hidden in some of the bags themselves, the trio jump in the car the Baron drives off in, the other three seeing him rush toward them as he's about to crash into the stone wall. But he hits a button on a remote and drives right through an opening, then into the barn as well, which the gang rush through before it closes. He then opens another passageway, his plane waiting, and then he just hops away. Weirdo. The boys are still picking apples uselessly, get sucked into another mess, and fall through the floor into another room. There they uncover a crate.
Caution! Do not open! Danger! Oh, Scoob, I'm dying to know what's inside.
Zero survival skills, my goodness. Inside they find a bunch of springs, which end up on Scooby as he hops around, right into a locked door that they knock on, everyone else on the other side hearing it. Thelma shouts and explains their situation, so Shaggy saw us through the door as the Baron hops over.
We did this in a movie once, right?
Good to know, so the Stooges definitively were in movies in this continuity. Mo ties the saw to the propeller so it will cut through, the Red Baron outside starting his flight and laughing, prepared to drop the weed killer all over the delicious corn. This is enough to trigger the boys into action, running right up to the tower, operating the suddenly much smaller miniature plane, and sending it to attack the Baron. He's forced to land, using his remote to have his regular plane come over, which he hops into and starts to get away. Everyone else somehow manages to fit inside the other plane, but Curly forgot his comic, so Scooby uses the miniature plane to fly over and help out by reading it for him. And that's a little too complicated to follow, so Scooby just has them follow him instead, knocking the wings off the Red Baron's plane and sending him into the barn. Somehow he always has a backup plan though. Because he jumps into the Jeep, they dump the weed killer on him, causing him to crash, with Scooby gracefully landing on him and finally stopping it all. The others manage to land while Mr. Sawyer also arrives right on time, and Scooby unmasks the Red Baron, revealing Mr. Siegfried. Dig Velma's line coming out of Daphne here.
Jinkies! I was positive it was old Mr. Terra.
Siegfried used the ghost to scare away legitimate pilots, then switched the weed killer and fertilizer so he could ruin the crops. The county was planning to buy the surrounding farms and airport, hoping to expand it into a jet field, so he was poisoning the crops to buy the farms and run away dirt cheap, then sell them back for a profit.
Curses, Mr. Baron! Foiled again!
Mr. Sawyer throws a massive banquet to thank everybody, this sausage being a little too large, so Curly slices it up with the plane propeller. Daphne and Fred still wonder how the Baron was hopping around and floating, however. Leave it to Scooby, flying around on a hook and cable, and then showing off the springs in the boots, revealing the ghostly secrets. The hopping is still crazy though, like, for why? And that's the ghost of the Red Baron. Between these two episodes, sometimes I feel like I preferred this one, and sometimes the other. At least when it comes to the Stooges, even with them being involved in the plane shenanigans, I feel like they are kind of just an afterthought and underutilized here. They don't do all that much that is really significant or changes things most of the time. They don't have all that much screen time. They don't really do too much that it makes them stand out as the Stooges outside of some hijinks when flying. If this episode was your first introduction to them, it probably wouldn't be interesting or compelling enough to make you start looking for their back catalog these days. So just for our guest stars specifically, I think Ghastly Ghost Town is actually the stronger showing. That this episode is kind of just really a long Scooby episode and the Stooges are insignificant is one of the things I liked as a kid though. I didn't really care about them and just enjoyed the gang. The mystery itself is overall kind of just a repeat of Spooky Space Coop, someone trying to scare people off from an airport to buy the land cheap. But I feel like this episode actually gives us a lot of clues before the gang even find them, enough to start actually piecing together the puzzle and solve the mystery ourselves. Not every episode actually makes it feel like you can really solve this. We have plenty of characters around that could be suspicious, like the mechanic who we never see again and never find out if he's even involved, considering his weird reaction, unless I'm off my rocker and we did. But between the fertilizer early on, the plant inside that wilts after being given it, and all the other various clues, this episode actually feels like one of the stronger mysteries if you are keen on solving them with the episode. I'm not sure how memorable the villain is for other people, but I do think it's always interesting when you have real historical characters be a ghost or villain of some kind. Like, why on earth would the literal Red Baron be haunting a random farm area? I'm not really sure his design is authentic, but it works. He's all dressed in red, he has a spooky ghost face. You look at him and go, yes, that looks like a Red Baron that would be fighting Snoopy. Like I said earlier though, this one definitely feels like it has some filler to pad out the runtime, but I never really cared about that. I really will just sit here and watch Shaggy and Scooby pick apples while nothing important happens. Maybe other people aren't as excited about that though. Thelma is kind of the highlight throughout this episode, but she really often is. I always forget how funny she tends to be. This episode, like the one before it, has never been one of my favorite episodes that stands out. I would probably put these more on the low end of episodes I would seek out to rewatch on their own, but there is still so much to enjoy about it. So is often the case, even episodes I'm not as enthusiastic about having plenty of merit in this show. I don't have too much really to talk about further though, so I'll try not to waste too much more time. Let's wrap it up. What it says on the tin, when Scooby-Doo met Don Knotts and the Three Stooges. Per usual, this was like 4 videos in one, so hopefully if you were looking to kill some time, the time is dead and buried. If you were working or some other type of multitasking, hopefully the task has been tasked. These episodes were definitely a seminal part of my childhood, with this particular Scooby series being my personal favorite growing up and perhaps most watched. All 4 of these episodes were included on the Best Of DVD set, rather than being held back with the 8 lost episodes, many of which we've covered already, so I had access to watch these over and over as a kid, and I certainly did. Even when they aren't necessarily my favorites, I have so much nostalgia and love for these episodes just from how often I would replay them, and I'm sure that's just going to continue in the future. Don Knotts will always be one of my favorite actors of his time, and it really feels like it's just natural that he was part of Scooby-Doo at some point. Maybe because The Ghost and Mr. Chicken specifically was one of my favorite films of his, and just appears right at home with the same atmosphere. He was definitely up there with my favorite guest stars at the very least, with the Globetrotters and Batman. I wasn't the biggest or most well-informed fan of the Stooges growing up, but I did know who they were enough to recognize them in these episodes and engage with them on that level. But I think having to tone them down and just the nature of there being 3 of them sort of makes it harder for them to shine, which is funny given that the Globetrotters are able to do it despite having a whole team. Here though, they are a little too sanitized compared to their actual short films and other appearances, to the point where none of the trio really stands out, and you might not get what their personalities are even supposed to be, which I find to be the case with a few of the guest stars on this show. I don't think it's enough to really take away from enjoying their appearance. I still enjoyed the novelty for what it was as a kid, and that was really the point. But every episode of the show really does tend to be a case-by-case basis on how well a guest star is presented and balanced alongside the gang. It probably doesn't help that the actual original Stooges aren't here to give any input in this case, having retired or passed away, so you just have the writers trying to imagine a sanitized version of what they would do or say. I think we have some strange guest appearances to get to next though, but also my personal favorite joke in any Scooby episode ever. So with 2 more of these videos left, we still have plenty of guests to look forward to. I actually held a poll to see what you guys would prefer when it came to the order of the remaining videos, and I was already planning for this to be the next one anyway, so it was lucky that this was picked to go first. So the one you see after this, if you're disappointed, remember this was a democracy, no longer my call. I think it works out though, because the one that's going last will now have some of my favorite guests that we have left, so we will definitely be ending on a strong note. I've tried to put out some shorter videos so that there is still some variety, so you can probably expect more of that instead of just constantly more of this, but someday this will return, probably in the next month or 2. Maybe it's already out because you're watching this a year or 2 or 3 later. Either way, there's now a playlist where you can find all of the videos discussing episodes of the new Scooby-Doo movies specifically if you want that. And I have way too many other videos if you want some variety. Thank you for coming along for yet another one of these rides. I'll see you on the next one. Bye!